All right, welcome back, everyone. It's been a little while since I've had a chance to do a webinar. My schedule is crazy, and the schedule of my friends is also crazy. So we were fortunate enough to lasso Susanne Madden from the Verden group in today to talk about practice management startups. This is one of the most exciting and important things that we do at PCC, and that's why Suzanne's here. She's an expert at it. I'm going to let her talk in a second. I want to give it a little background. But just to feed anybody who doesn't know who Susanne is, Susanne, how many practice startups have you worked with over the last couple of years?
Oh boy, let's see, we've been doing this since 2007. We're somewhere in the 80s in terms of our pediatric startups. We've done a variety of startups, including primary care and some other subspecialties, but pediatrics is really our focus. And yeah, I think we're at 82, maybe a little higher. We've got 9 currently in process, so that number will jump pretty quick too.
So the demise of the independent pediatric practice is overstated, in your opinion.
We like to refer to it as a myth. Yes, a myth that we're happy to dissolve.
Yeah, I know that what she was going to say when I asked that question, because Susanne and I have been teaching for the last, I think it's 4 years, and this is our 4th or 5th year of teaching at the AAP NCE, a class called how to open a pediatric practice in 5 easy steps.
Right.
And rather than review all the steps in a minute, I'll let Susanne talk about a couple of them in a second. The materials are online. It's a very, very well received event at the NCE. So for example, this year, for those of you who went to New Orleans, or if you've ever been to the New Orleans Convention Center, it is 1.2 miles from the entrance to the classroom we were in. Okay, we were in the second.
No kidding. It really was the furthest classroom you could possibly find in that whole convention center.
And we almost packed the room, which is really hard to do. The rooms seat 100+ people, and even though right at the beginning of the class we only had like 20 or 30, within 10 minutes, because it's a 10 or 15-minute walk, we had packed the room. And this year was special because I can't remember if it was our idea or the AAP's, but we evolved, if that's a transitive verb, we evolved the class into a workshop. So rather than Susanne and I being funny and lecturing everyone, we broke it down about halfway into the class into a series of roundtables where Susanne and I, and we had 2 or 3 of our independent pediatrician friends who we've helped open practices come and answer questions, and I love it. So one of the things, it was 2 years ago.
Way, quick shout out to Dr. Harold Lavagna, Dr. Karen Fody, and Dr. Irma. Thank you so much for you guys really assisting with us and helping us. It came from New Orleans and from Georgia and from California. So thanks so much for that.
And the fact of the matter is they are so much more compelling than I will ever be. Maybe right about as compelling as you are. And one of the reasons is that I'd asked Susanne this question 2 years ago. I said, of those 80 odd practices, how many of those practices are you noticed are being opened by women? And she was like, like almost all of them. And I did a survey, it's on my blog, and we discovered that 88% of the new practices that PCC and Susanne at the Verden group and Polly Vencieri, one of our friends, the 88% of the new practices we worked with in the last couple of years are opened by women. And I think the number, I might get it wrong, but it was 40-something% of the new practices we worked with are being opened by people of color. And when we've been teaching this class the last 2 years at the NCE, I will tell you that the constituency of the people in the room is very different from the constituency of the NCE in general. It's about 80% women, and it's about half people of color, which is a really fun and rewarding session to present. Yeah. So now, Susanne, I will ask you, I'm going to give you a minute here. Of the 5 steps to opening a practice, which we were brainstorming before we fired this up, we couldn't even remember the 5 in order. But of the things that you like to tell people, if you had to give them 2 minutes, what do you need to know about opening a practice? What are the things that you hit?
Oh boy, I mean, first get really clear on what it is that you want to do. What is your concept? What's your practice, right? Because if you don't have a lock on that, it's very hard to articulate that to anybody else, and it's really hard to build resonance with your potential practice population. So,
And your banker.
yeah, and your banker, right? You need
Yeah.
to be able to describe what's your concept and why are you doing it. So get really clear, obviously, on what it is that you want to build, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you really need to make sure that you're going to establish yourself in the right place. So location truly is everything. And when we talk about location, it's not just where the patient's at and how to be able to get them in your doors, but a variety of variables like, is there parking? Is there adequate parking? How many steps are there between the parking lot and your office? Do they have to, go up an elevator to get to you? Those sorts of things actually are really important, right? So you want access to be a part of looking at your location. You need a business plan. You need to really understand those financials. And for a number of reasons, it's not just to secure loans with the bankers, but we tend to use these financials then as a budget, right? To see, are you on track with where we anticipated you would be, in the first 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, and adjusting it accordingly. Did you have overruns on some of your startup? Are you growing more slowly than you might have wanted to be? We always try and be really conservative in our numbers in terms of estimating revenue, and tend to overestimate what the costs are going to be so that our clients, end up at that tipping point of break even, sooner rather than later. You need to hire right. Certainly you need to staff up appropriate to your culture, right? And so just to touch on that point again of really figuring out who you want to be, what is your concept, what does that concept need to look like? You absolutely need to be clear on that, because that's your culture. That's what you're going to be training your people, your staff, to put forward to your patients, right? So you want to hire right, and you can only hire right if you're clear on what it is that you're looking to hire for. So for example, is your practice going to be one that is about fostering a sort of a family feeling with your patients? Do you want that to be really highly personable? If so, you do not want a grumpy face at your front desk. I mean, you don't want a grumpy face at your front desk, period, but
Anyway, yeah.
you certainly don't want it if that is really what you're trying to articulate, right? If you call yourself super happy pediatrics and then you have grumpy people, you see the disconnect, right? So you really want to be able to
in the last year and a half, 2 years, so many of my seminars and talks have morphed from talking about the technical issues of RVUs and pricing and location. And I almost talk exclusively now about culture and change and working with the right people. So I'm in huge agreement with you. I keep realizing,
boy, matters.
Yeah, it really matters. So I'm going to ask you this before we turn to our directly to our topic. What is the one thing, the one mistake that practices tend to make before they open their doors? Because I know what mine is. I know what when someone comes to me and says, I need to open in 3 months, the first thing I say to them is X. And I want to see if your X and my X are the same thing.
Yeah, don't rush it, right? I mean, what you really want to make sure that you've planned for this appropriately. There are so many pieces to it, which is not to say that everything has to be perfect by the time you open your doors, but you need some fundamental key pieces in there, right? If you're rushing to open your practice, frankly, you're not going to be contracted with the insurance companies on time. It's going to take them at least 3 months to credential and contract with you. So that's not going to happen if you're trying to do this in 3 months. I mean, typically our timeline is 6 to 9 months. Most of our startups do it within a year, and that allows sufficient time to get all of the right things, in place. So the biggest mistake is rushing it. Don't rush it. You need to actually plan accordingly for this. Now, of course, sometimes you may end up in a situation, Chip, right, where, our clients are, really in a hurry to open a practice because, for example, they just left a hospital, or a hospital, spun off their practice and they need to open their doors quickly. Okay, there are emergency provisions, we can help account for in that scenario. But if you have the option to not rush it, do not rush it. It also creates a tremendous amount of stress for you. So you're opening a practice on burnout, right? So you want to be able to come at it relaxed, ready to go, really understanding what you're doing, and go forward as you need to go on.
Yeah, what I tell people when they come to me and say, all right, I want to open my practice, I always say when, and if they tell me 3 months from now, I say, so your location is locked in, you've gotten your credentialing down, and you know who your office manager and billers are going to be? Because if they don't, I say it's not going to happen in 3 months. It's going to happen in 6 months or 9 months or 12. So anyway, we're on the same page. Now, the reason Susanne and I are fired up this webinar today is because at our workshop at the NCE, we didn't have enough time to answer everybody's questions. So we
No, we
had
didn't.
people, yeah, we could have been there for another 2 hours, and it's
Well, and
fun.
we did. We ran over, right, and then we had conversations in the hallways and everything, and still didn't get to cover all of this.
And we would stay there all day answering these questions. So what we did is we didn't want anyone to panic. We asked everyone to write down their questions, and we have 5 or 6.
Oh, by the way, Chip, that just reminds me. So we could stay all day. Guess what? PMI, right? Pediatric Management Institute in January, we have a whole track for pediatric startups. So just a plug for that. If you are actually looking for a half a day, it's not a whole day, but we can make ourselves available. The Pediatric Management Institute in Miami in January.
I'm glad you remembered to say that, because I would have forgotten. And it's not like I'm
There you
not
go.
going to be there. I'm like, I'm one of the speakers. So thank you for that. January 2020 in Miami, the Pediatric Management Institute. This topic is really dominating so much of what we do that we're going to return to it over and over again. And I find myself saying a lot of the same things over and over. So I want to get them here recorded and done so that we can get past the common items. Right. And get into, and when we have time to spend with someone individually, we can focus on what makes them unique. So anyway, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to ask these questions, and I'm going to give Susanne, because of our timing, we got to cram this into about 30 minutes. All right, so I'm going to ask a question. We're going to hear Susanne for about 2 minutes or 3 minutes. I'm going to add any curveball or frosting or spice that I might think of that she didn't cover, and then we're going to move on. However, we again want to reduce anyone's anxiety here. If you have questions, all right, it's chip@pcc.com. It's Susanne with an S at the Verden group. If you're watching this webinar, you know how to get. Oh yeah.
Madden.
All right, and we can't edit this stuff in real time. It's Madden at the Verden group. You should add Susanne and just forward it. But
I do that. I deliberately did that, Chip, just to trip you up by using my last name.
Well, it worked. If you email me, I will share it with Susanne nonetheless. And the thing is, we want your questions. We will answer them publicly for free. Sure. This is our passion. This is our mission. So here, we're going to start at the beginning. These questions, by the way, were great that we got at the NCE. So alrighty, Susanne, I'm going to ask you first. You're going to give me 2 minutes, and then I'll see if I can add anything. What are you looking for in an interview for hiring, and how do you evaluate candidates? Susanne had already told you that this is one of the most important parts of this process. So Susanne, what do you tell people when they ask you that question? How do I interview well?
Yeah, so again, it goes back to, are you clear on who you are? What is it that you're actually looking for, right? So spend the work to actually write that out, work on that, perfect that. What's your pitch, right? Because that's going to drive your culture, it's going to drive your mission, and it's going to drive your vision. Okay, so you want to be able to articulate that. So when you're meeting with potential candidates, the key things that you're going to sort of want to feel is, do you have resonance with this person, right? If you feel somewhat uncomfortable talking to this person, they're not a good fit for you. It doesn't matter if they have all the experience in the world. If you don't feel comfortable with them, imagine how that's going to play out day after day, week after week, right? So do the gut check. Always do the gut check. That's fine. The second piece, though, is when you're interviewing candidates, come in with your pitch. Start with giving an overview of what your practice looks like. What is it that you're trying to build? What are you trying to create? And then ask them how their experience and their personality and their education fits with what it is that you're trying to do. That'll solicit a lot of sort of back and forth between you and the candidate and give you a really clear picture of what they have to bring to the table, right? So instead of you just sort of, asking questions or doing too much of the talking, you really want to be able to place set it. What have you got? What are you looking to do? And then have them tell you what they're going to do, within that environment. That can be very revealing and really help you to sort of, get to the crux of, who is this person and how are they likely to perform in your practice. So very important to do that. The other piece that's really important to do, though, is also know what not to ask, right? So do a quick Google search on, employers, what should not be asked in interviews. There are laws around these things. So you can't say, what age are you? How much are you earning now? Believe it or not, that's a real issue. You can't ask somebody what they're earning now because that's a way of sort of depressing their potential earnings, right? You can certainly say, how much do you expect to earn in this position? That's perfectly fine. But you can't ask certain pointed questions, right, around ageism and those sorts of things. So definitely figure that piece out. We may actually end up, Chip, I think, doing a piece on that, what not to ask if you're, employing people at your pediatric practice. So definitely do that. And then always get references, right? Don't just ask for the good ones. Everybody's going to give you sort of the good references. As a candidate is talking through who they've worked for, what their experiences look like in the past, ask them to provide you with the names and contact information of the people they directly reported to, right? And so the reason why you really want to do that is you want to sort of sidestep those that are going to put a really nice gloss on this person. It's okay if there were some issues at a prior job, right? That happens, but it's good for you to know and understand what some of those issues may be. Unfortunately, the reality is most of the time, all you're doing is verifying employment, but you may have somebody that you're speaking to that offers up some information, in that regard about performance. So definitely ask for those sorts of personal references. And then ask them, realistically, what are they looking for long-term? Because somebody may just be looking for a job, or they may be thinking, hey, this is handy, it's opening up down my street, but they might be going back to nursing school, or they might be, looking to do something far into the future. It's good to know that, because that could be somebody that you could actually help to train up and grow and retain, as opposed to not really knowing that and then having somebody exit your organization in a year or two when you've invested a lot of time, energy, and money in them. So also get a sense of what the future looks like for them too.
All right, and I agree with you 110%. I think it's about aligning people with your culture. One of the things that I ask people to do is sit down and make a list of the things that need to happen to run a practice, which is the sort of thing that Susanne will help you do, and find the things on that list that you're good at, and find those things that you're bad at, and hire people to do the things that you're bad at. Most of the time, and let me also add, it's not simply what you're bad at and what you're good at, it's also what you enjoy doing.
Really?
So the first person, and the most important person that you should think about hiring, is someone to help you manage the practice. And once you hire the right person to manage your practice, that person then helps you hire the remaining people who might be helping you do billing and might be helping you clinically or whatever the case may be. So I'm in full agreement with everything you said there. And there's just an order to operations that help make things easy. What I don't like seeing is when a practice goes out and just hires people for very narrow jobs. So this is a biller, this is a front desk person, and they do all that ahead of actually having a plan for the overall flow in the practice. And that's how you end up with front desk people becoming office managers, which I know plenty who've evolved that way, and it's great, but that's getting lucky, and that's not, getting lucky is not a good business plan. All right.
Just a quick tip on that. We often say for our startups, because a lot of our startups are solo practitioners, they don't need a lot of staff. We say, hire a couple of MAs, right, and use them front and back. That way they're interchangeable. They're both able to, help and assist you on any area across your practice. The other thing we encourage our startups to do is to outsource your billing, at least for the first year or two. And part of the reason why is because if you're not good at it and you don't really understand, coding and billing and claims and insurance companies, as most of you don't, naturally so, you're clinicians, not billers. But by outsourcing that, it sort of takes that off your plate. Obviously you want to find a really good billing company. PEDS one, for example, works with PCC exclusively out of the PCC system, knows that inside out. But you would want to have that sort of assistance, because that way that's handled, it's taken care of. The experts have got it. You're not leaving any money on the table. You're not having to manage this at the end of the day, and you can focus on building your practice, marketing, right? Really refining what it is your core concept, working with your staff, training them, building in other lines of business like lactation, bringing in behavioral health into your practice, those sorts of things. That's where you want to put your time, your energy, and your effort. If you get lucky and you hire somebody that is a biller and really understands that and can do that well, great, then fantastic. But most of the time that won't be the case. And so we often suggest that just outsource that billing for at least a couple of years. You can always bring it back in-house or bring it in-house later on when your practice is, thriving and growing and you have more time to be able to address those sorts of things.
Right, I agree. All right, so next question. I get this one a lot, and it's funny, it's always easier for me to answer it, or the answer I give is always easier for me to embrace because it's not my career and lifestyle that we're talking about. But what does the worst case scenario look like? What does failure look like? And if both from a financial and professional perspective. You and I have both worked with practices, and we've worked together on some practices who have failed. And so I want to hear from you. What is your worst case scenario for a startup practice, both financially and professionally?
Well, to start, we've never had a startup that failed. So just need to place that right there. And truly that's part of bringing on board a consultant to help you with your practice, or, whether it's Chip or myself or Polyventier or whomever, right? Part of what you're doing there is you're hiring the expertise to make sure that you don't have to make these mistakes and you don't have to have these failures, right? Because you're investing a lot of money and time and energy into this and really trying to make a big, change. So I just needed to say that our practices don't fail. However, I think what Chip is alluding to is there are plenty of practices in general that do fail. And so what are, the things that trip them up? So really from my experience, the things that trip up practices, and particularly small practices, is not making the change that you need to make at the right time. And here's a perfect example. You've hired in, say, a nurse practitioner, the volume isn't there, it's not growing, you continue to keep this person on, you're hemorrhaging cash, right? You're paying them, you're paying their salary, benefits, everything else. It's not growing, you don't have the numbers to support that, but you keep going, right? In the hope that it will. You really need to cut your losses. Once you've identified that there are losses, you're just going to get deeper into the hole, right? Don't throw good money after bad. Just because you started this project doesn't mean that you can't terminate it. So really being able to keep your finger on the pulse of what we call key performance indicators, month to month, quarter to quarter for sure, but absolutely month to month is much more realistic. That allows you to see where certain things are trending. The other thing is a shift in your population base, right? If you've had a hospital that's sort of been feeding you newborns and they don't need you to do rounding anymore. Right now they have a hospitalist, you're not needed, and now you're not getting as many newborns over. You need to figure out a plan for being able to capture that market, whether it's direct marketing, sponsoring t-shirts on the local team at the local school, those sorts of things. You may need to step up your marketing, is the point I'm making, to make sure that you can regain the balance, right? Particularly when we look at newborns, because of the fact that obviously there are so many visits in those first 2 years of life, so many vaccinations. If you miss that piece of business, then you're in real trouble. And the sort of flip side of that is your practice, are your patients aging out of your practice? And is the neighborhood, around you that had been sustaining your practice really changing, where there aren't new families moving in? In fact, most of them are moving out. You really would want to, address that, which means move, go where the patients are if that's what you need to do. So those are really the sort of the primary areas as I see them, Chip.
Yep, and again, I agree with that. I've never worked with a startup that failed. I've worked with practices that have failed over time because either they lack a proper plan,
right,
and even for those few who had plans, as you said it, just as I think about it, they didn't execute on a plan that they understood. They lacked either the willpower or the interest or the ability to confront a necessary change. I mean, you and I have seen that 100 times.
Yeah.
The thing I'll tell physicians, though, or pediatricians, as long as people continue to have babies and those babies continue to come into the office, you can generate enough revenue to solve a lot of problems.
Right.
And so the worst case scenario that I see for a lot of practices is they just don't make as much money as they hoped or expected. Right. And so they still survive. The worst case scenario, all right, you get into a lease that gets screwed up, your building gets flooded, you don't have a place to see patients, or whatever the case may be, you pick up and you start over somewhere else. And one of the things that you have, it's this enormous benefit of being a pediatrician, is that there are some parts of the country that have too many pediatricians. There, these highly suburban areas in the country have too many pediatricians. But I guess in terms of zip codes, I bet 90% of the zip codes in the United States could use another pediatrician. And so you can pick up and move somewhere. So we have, I know pediatricians who have had to pick up and move, but they always land on their feet. No one starves to death. Their kids go to college and pay for it. They all have houses, right? That's
it. I mean, if you can still function and you can serve patients, you're fine, right? It's just a matter of where you sort of, where you go next. So, worst case scenario isn't you're bankrupt, you're homeless, and, everything, sort of goes away. It's just a matter of how do you sort of evolve, or how do you roll forward, into something else and going forward.
Yep, that's absolutely it. So the point that Susanne and I are obliquely making is that we often meet people. Actually, was just at this year's NCE. I walked over to one of the tables, and one of the women were there, and she's like, "You probably don't recognize me." I said, "Oh, I recognize you. You were sitting in the back of the room last year, and you didn't believe me when I told you could open a practice." And she said, "You're right. Yet here I am.
Here I am.
Yeah, and I didn't have a plan yet, and I'm working on my plan." I said, it's the hardest part of opening the practice is the emotional leap at the beginning. And it's easy for Susanne and me to say, look, you're not going to die. You're going to be okay. It works out. But that's because our experience, having done this for literally decades between us, is that with a little bit of, well, actually, I'll take that back. With some real hard work, but with a little bit of planning and a little bit of organization, you will succeed. And that is the message that the hospitals and the healthcare systems don't want you to know.
Right, exactly right. They tell you it's too hard, you can't do it on your own, you need us, and that's absolutely not true. Planning is the key. One other item, though, that I definitely want to make sure and highlight is making sure that you have access to funds for your first year, right? So where we see some people get into a pinch is they budgeted for opening, but they didn't budget for how do you survive the first 6 months or so, right? You absolutely want to make sure that you've got enough money available to you that you can, process payment. It takes a while for your claims to come in, right? You open on, say, the 1st of January, you submit your claims. It can take 30 days before you're getting payment back, right? So definitely that first month, you're just not seeing revenue coming in, though you may be working really hard. The other thing is it may be a slow build. If you're opening in a new area, you don't have a patient following coming with you, you're building from scratch, and that can actually, take some time to build up. So you want to make sure that you can tap into funds. I'm not suggesting that you have to over borrow. Usually what we suggest is you borrow for the startup costs, right? You borrow for the build out, you borrow for the supplies and the things that you need to open your doors, right? And a cushion then for the first 30 days, and then have access, for example, to a line of credit. So it's there if you need it. If you don't need it, great, happy days, right? But if you do need it, you're not going back to the bank to say, we sort of, are underfunded and now we're getting into difficulties, because that's not what the banks want to hear, right? They don't want to give you another loan if they think that something is going wrong. So just make sure that you have that. And frankly, there's a lot of really good financial instruments now available, particularly to physicians, that marry a set lump sum term loan with a line of credit that you can draw down from for a period of time.
This is a math problem, and it's a math problem that Susanne and I do on the back of a napkin once a week for somebody to just say, this is how much money you need. You need this amount of money over this amount of time, which translates to this number of patients. And it's not hard work, or it's not rocket science. And so anyway, I want to move on to the next question, but it's eminently doable. All right, next question.
One more thing. Somebody's thinking in their head, how much does it actually cost to start a practice, right? So the least expensive we have seen is about $75,000. That's when you have walk-in ready space, right? There's no build out. You're not having to do anything extensive. That $75,000 really covers you for your first couple of months rent, hiring your staff, having enough cash on hand for your first month, very small office, single practitioner, right? Swing to the other end could be a $500,000 investment if you are doing an extensive build out on, say, 3,000 square feet. If you're buying some property or a condo or a building, we've had some clients that have purchased houses in a mixed commercial and residential area and then transformed them into practices. So it can really swing as high as truly you want to go, but at the lower end it is about $75,000. I haven't seen it done.
No, I don't think you can do it. If you're doing it cheaper than that, something isn't.
You're missing something. Exactly.
You're going to get burned. Yeah. All right. So thank you. Next question. How do you separate from your current practice? How much notice do you give? How can patients follow me without violating a non-solicitation clause? So 2 minutes, Susanne, go.
Well, it's a rhetorical question, right? So how can you, solicit patients without violating your non-solicitation clause? You can't, right? If there's a non-solicitation, don't solicit. It doesn't mean that other people can't tell patients where you are. Doesn't mean you can't put up what we call a splash page, online, which may just be a one-page website with a picture of you and a form where patients can input. So in other words, if they're searching for you and they do a Google search, they'll find you. Can you say that? Is that solicitation if you say to people, Google search for me and you'll find me? Not really, but you want to be very careful about what that communication is to your existing patients. Non-solicitation clauses are there, obviously for a reason. You don't want to decimate somebody else's practice when you're leaving, right? You wouldn't want somebody to do that to you. So you want to be careful, about how you do that. The question though, how do you separate from your current practice? The devil's in the details. What are you obligated to? What does your contract actually say? What does your employment agreement say? If you don't have specific conditions in there, then I would just suggest do the right thing, right? You don't want to leave on 10 days notice. It's not fair to your patients, it's not fair to the practice, even if it's a horrible situation. Keep your own integrity, right, is really what I'm saying, and provide, some reasonable notice. 90 days, would be reasonable, probably not optimal if that practice is really relying on you to see patients and cover a call and do a variety of things. 120 days, would be sort of, better for them, but what's better for you? I mean, frankly, we like to see our clients working out 120 days because of the fact that it buys you that time, right? You want to be able to have the time to start building your practice or creating all of the pieces that we need to do operationally, which is, the market analysis, finding the right location, getting you organized for contracting with payers, etc. So a lot of that work can sort of be done ahead of time. Then you put in your notice, you work out, 4 months, you're doing sort of double duty, right? You're working at that practice while you're trying to get your own operation up and running. But that really does provide significant time and allows you to continue to earn. Now, sometimes we have clients that, the minute they give their notice, they know they're going to be terminated, that, that they may be working for a practice that is not going to reply in kind with that level of integrity, right? And so planning for that is really important too. Timing is everything. The single big issue here is the insurance companies won't contract and credential with you until you have an actual location, right? Because what else are they putting into their system? They need a location, phone number, etc., to be able to link your new entity and tax ID number to. So timing, is really a big component of this. And so often, if we're in a situation advising a client where they think, hey, if I hand in my notice, I'm terminated, that's it, I'm gone. We often will look to see, is there any per diem work around? Is there some, part-time work around? And or is there an opportunity, particularly if a location can be found very readily and very quickly, to open your practice as a sort of a cash pay practice initially to see certain clients, just to keep that going, certain patients, keep that going while the insurance companies are getting you credentialed and contracted so that you can participate in those networks.
Suzanne, I want to just say that what you just laid out for people is, to me, maybe the most important discussion to have with a practice opening up, and that's the order of events. You can't get credentialed until you have a space, and a lot of people will not commit to a space until, because it makes sense, until they know for sure they're leaving the practice, or that the moment they sign a lease that starts in 3 months, now they have to tell their employers, which they've been dreading, and it's that whole cycle. They put off telling their employers so they don't sign the lease, so they don't get credentialed, and every week that passes when you haven't locked those things in is a week without cash flow.
Right.
And you know this. I'm lecturing you like you don't know this.
Yes, I'm agreeing. I'm absolutely supporting those statements. And and so it sometimes feels like a chicken and egg, issue, but truly it's not. And so sometimes you get lucky, you find a space, you're ready to go. I always like to say, it's okay if you end up paying rent for a month before you're able to move in. That's okay, right? It means you've locked in
normal.
Space.
That's the cost of doing business, yeah.
Absolutely. And over the course of your practice there, what's a month, right? So, so that's okay. So it doesn't need to be a rush, but you do need to have somewhere to land, right? Particularly if you feel like there's some jeopardy in terms of when you turn in your notice, what's actually going to happen then with the employer.
I have 3 really quick things to add to this. First of all, when it comes to giving notification and notifying your patients, there is a state level consideration you have to make. Different states have different requirements. Talk to your state medical society. Some states require that an employer actually make an announcement that you're leaving. Some actually require that they might even have to tell them where you're going. So look into that. Your payers also may have the same thing. And last but not least, your employment agreement may limit some of these things. So that's one item. One of the things that I find is that a lot of people who are leaving an employer, especially an existing independent group, one of the reasons they're leaving is because they are much more ambitious about what they want to accomplish with their patients. And what I see a lot of the time is that those people have a much more ambitious plan for social media. And so I'm just adding on to something that Susanne said. You may not be able to get a list of all the patients from your employer and send them all a message. Okay, that might be that may not be illegal, but
great.
that may be,
yes, it's great if you can. That's
great
perfect.
if you can, but that's very rare. However, it's very common that a new and opening practice can be so much more facile with social media, whether it's running Google ads or Facebook ads or having a much more responsive website. And all of that stuff can be done in advance. So you can actually make an announcement locally that gets more traffic than if you actually did end up with a list of your patients.
Right.
So that's one other. And the last thing is this. I have been, because of what PCC does, I have been in many times been asked to negotiate between a practice that's divorcing, between two entities in a divorcing practice. Someone's leaving the practice. And one of the things that we've learned is that if you burn the bridge, which is what Susanne was cautioning you against doing, if you burn the bridge, very often the old practice it's perfectly within their rights to do as little as possible to make opening your new practice easy or facile, even for your patients. However, if you maintain that relationship, one of the things that it does lead to sometimes is for the new practice to go back to the old practice and say, how about you just transfer all of the charts with my name on them to the new practice. And that sounds, I want you to think about this a little bit, because a lot of people don't think about it until it's too late. But I have absolutely negotiated opportunities for new practices to get copies of all of the charts for their patients at their old practice, because they maintain that relationship and they explain to the old practice, look, you can give these to me and I'll leave you alone, or your patients, your former patients, the ones who came with me, are going to be pestering your practice 5-10 times a day to transfer those charts to me, which you have to do by law. So we can do this the adult way and everybody wins, or we can fight about it. And I've actually had good success doing that. And a lot of times, because everyone here in the room is a pediatrician, they're like, okay, that's the right thing to do for the kids. And we don't have to be, this can be an amicable split. So I'm just adding a little bit of frosting to what Susanne said. All right, Susanne, according to our timer, I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. You ready?
Okay.
Whoops,
ready.
sorry.
Hit me up.
All right. This one is kind of fun because I have a very specific response to this. And I want to see what you say. All right. Suzanne and I did not coordinate our answers at all. All right. You should know
usually
that.
we're on the same page, but sometimes we get different, and that's
funny.
fun.
It's funny to see where the spaces are. I'm rarely surprised by one of her answers any more than she's rarely surprised by one of mine. So maybe we'll get a surprise here. Is it better to look for an experienced partner, or is it better to hire right out of residency? Go.
It's a sort of an awkwardly phrased question, in fairness. No offense to whomever actually wrote that in. One is about a partner, the other is about maybe an employee. So realistically, here's how I'm going to lay this out. Realistically, you're starting your own practice. Do you even want a partner right out of the gate? This is your vision, right? So you're obviously leaving a group. Well, in many cases, leaving a group because you want to do it your way, right? So I'd first ask, contemplate, do you need a partner? Why do you need a partner? What are you looking for in a partner? If it's somebody that's approached you and said, hey, let's partner up, or hey, let's open a practice together, then I sort of understand the question better, right? So if that person is somebody out of residency that, maybe, you've talked to, or, via another colleague or something, and says, look, I'm really not interested in working for anybody else. I want to hang out my own shingle, not really sure what to do. You're an experienced pediatrician. You're breaking away from this group. Should we partner up? A couple of things obviously are going to come up. This speaks to what makes a good partner, right? And so we often use a document called the Path to Partnership to really outline what are the key attributes that you want in a partner. How new you are, how old you are, how many partners you already have, doesn't matter, right? What are you actually looking for in a partner? You don't want to take on somebody that can't add to the business, right? It's not just a worker bee that you're looking for. Yes, obviously seeing patients brings in the revenue, But if that's really, all that somebody feels are obligated to do, which is to be productive and bring in the revenue, that's not a good partner. A good partner is somebody that wants to grow, develop, learn all about the business side of the practice, really steps up to the plate with projects. What happens if you want to transition into being, for example, a patient-centered medical home? There's a lot of project work that goes along with that. What happens when you're looking for a new space or you're looking to grow? Is the business acumen there? So you really want somebody that can be a collaborator as well as bring, a lot to the table. That you need them to be equal, right? Which is not to say you have to have equal partnerships. You can set up your practice as an LLC and have various levels of shareholders, right? You can have somebody that has a 5% or 10% stake in your practice, right? And not be an equal partner. But what I'm trying to underline here is what makes a good partner is where you need to start from, right? And so you need to figure out, what do you need? If you're looking for a partner because you sort of feel like, oh, maybe I can't do this on my own, why can't you do it on your own? What is it that you're lacking? And those things that you're lacking, you might be able to outsource for, right? There may be other resources that can help you with that. So don't just sort of automatically springboard into that partner. Last but not least, would somebody out of residency make a good partner? They might, right? Again, it really depends what they have to bring to the table. It's going to be specific to a person's skill set, but at least try them on for a while, right? You at least want to work together in some sort of employment arrangement for a period of time, and then determine, is it worth, shifting into partnership? Most of our clients, our mature practices, have a, 3, in some cases 5-year partnership track for people that have worked for them already for a year. So you work for a year before you even sort of go on that partnership track, and then maybe another 3 to 5 years. Various variables in there, whether there's a buy-in, whether it's sweat equity, those sorts of things come into play. But the idea here is don't rush it. Don't rush into partnership. It is like getting married. Divorces totally sucks. So, you want to make sure that you absolutely are making the right decision from the get-go. So figure out how you want to evaluate that, what you're looking for in a partner, and, what is actually going to benefit the practice over time.
At the PCC Users Conference this summer, at the PCC Users Conference in general, I usually do a class where I sit in front of an audience for 2 hours and just answer any question that comes up like this. And I got one of my favorite questions of all time from, I was trying to remember who asked me, maybe it was Dr. Una, but anyway, someone raised a hand and said, Chip, what is the optimum number of partners in a pediatric practice? And I was like, oh, it's a good question. I saw everyone get a pen and pencil. I got ready. They're like, okay. Yep. Everyone was expecting a number like 5 or 3 or 8 or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And the only answer I have is as few as possible, right. Which was to your point, like a good partner makes your practice, and a bad partner will sink your practice. Right. And I am fully employed because I work with practices all the time where, 20 minutes into my consulting gig, I'm like, why are you guys working together? You have totally different understanding of what you're doing. The biggest mistake people make, not the biggest, but one of them, is not distinguishing between the value they bring to the practice because of the revenue they generate, seeing patients, and the value they bring to their practice because they stay awake at night, making sure that payroll happens, or negotiating a lease, or talking to your EHR vendor, working with someone like you or me. Those are 2 different things. There's the value you bring as a revenue generator, and there's the value you bring as a partner. Right. And so the way I interpret this message is, okay, I'm a year into my new practice, and I want to find a partner because that's the vision that I have. I want to share some of the obligation as well as some of the benefit of being here. Should I look for someone who's seasoned, and should I look for someone who's coming out of residency? And in my experience, I don't think I can say that there's an advantage either way. I agree with you wholly that you want to work with someone. You want to date before you get married. You want to be engaged before you get married. And
date for a long time. No rushing into things either, right? I mean, 6 months, 8 months it's just not enough to know people. I'm sorry.
Not enough to know. And the other thing to keep in mind is someone's life circumstances change over time, and you may hire someone out of residency who says, no, I don't want to be a partner. I just want to be an employed physician, who 5, 6, 8, 10 years later wakes up suddenly and says, all right, now that my kids are in school, or now that I'm in this life circumstance, I'm ready to be a partner. And the one thing I tell people is, like, when you're going to employ the doctors and they really want partnership, but you're not prepared, or you don't think they're right, there is nothing wrong with paying them really well if they're delivering that part of the value to your practice. Because remember, it's what do they bring in for revenue and what do they contribute as partners? And if you're not ready for that partnership contribution, you can pay them really, really well to be employed physicians because they're still very valuable.
Right.
And you both win until you understand whether a partnership is possible.
Well, and just to springboard off of that a little bit, Chip, you also want to understand what is somebody's motivation for becoming a partner, right? So
Absolutely.
often when
Absolutely.
a client approaches and says, hey, we have this doctor asking for partnership, my first question is why, right? And then we have a conversation with that physician. What is it that you're looking for? Ultimately, it comes down to often, money, a greater share of the pie, and not taking on these extra responsibilities. So, sometimes people want to be sort of, masters of their own domain, and they really want to be much more involved in the operations of the practice. That's great. That makes a great partner. Scoop them up, right? But often it is about money, right? Just saying, hey, I've been working really hard for a number of years, and I want to be able to, gain the financial benefit of what I'm contributing to the practice in terms of building value. That's great. Just, change the productivity model. If you don't have one, put a productivity model in there,
Yep.
Find ways to compensate them, for that. And you don't need to add a partner, and that's ideal.
Yep. All right. So we have time. Yep. We have time for one more question if we can
Just
answer
one more.
In 60 seconds. We each get 60 seconds, okay?
Oh, that's hard for us.
Yes, it is hard for either one of us. All right. So what do you do? But this one I think we can do in 60 seconds. What do you do when one insurance does not send a contract for credentialing, or another insurance has no telephone number or rep to talk to and only email, and it takes them 30 days to reply? Your answer is?
Well, my answer is this is why you want to have lots of time to plan for opening your practice, right? This is why it's not done in 90 days, okay? Because you're always going to run into some issues with insurance companies. Yep. So here's a tip for you. If you have tried standard channels, if you've tried the 1-800 good luck number, you're not getting what you need from credentialing, etc., take to social media. Hashtag the insurance company, or go right on, even better, go right on their social media pages and say, I'm a physician, I'm a pediatrician, not just because I'm a pediatrician, and I have wasted enormous amounts of time trying to get contracted so that I can continue to serve my patient population in my new practice. What gives? You guys don't want to contract with pediatricians anymore? And watch how fast your phone's going to ring. We pull the trigger on that every now and again when we have to. We don't overuse it. Obviously, then it loses its effectiveness. But truly, work the channels, right? So part of this too is you need to sort of understand what it is that you're looking to do. Most of these insurance companies have credentialing information on their websites. Go through that process. Be aware that most of them will tell you it'll take 30 days to get back to you. But once you submit something, then call and follow up several times to make sure they got it. Don't waste 30 days and you follow up and then you realize they haven't received anything or went in the black hole, right? So you need to really actively manage to to those timelines just to keep things moving forward with the insurance company. If there's no telephone number, seriously, no telephone number, then you don't want to do business with that insurance company.
That's the answer I wanted. That's the answer I wanted. What? Don't contract with that. Leave those losers aside. Right?
Why try and participate with that? Don't waste your time.
So I have my 3 answers really fast because I'm going to do this in 30 seconds. It's because contracting is one of the most obvious places to hire a professional to do the work for you. I'm talking to someone right now who does this for a living. So call the Verden group. Call a professional credentialing agency. Yes, you have to stay on top of them, just like they have to stay on top of the insurance companies, but they often will have contacts and an understanding of how this stuff works in a way that you don't. All right, that's number 1. Number 2, inevitably in a community, you will actually know an employer or someone who's high up at one of the companies who's been saying to you, oh, I can't wait for you to open your practice. I want to be your first patient.
Right.
Call them up and say, call your insurance company and say that they want to switch to you, but they can't because you won't deal with contracting. Right. All it takes is, as Susanne knows, a call or two from a big employer, and suddenly all the obstacles go away.
Yeah.
Right? And then the last item I had was the one that you just concluded, which was if you are trying to deal with a payer who doesn't have a phone number and is not working with you, just take them off your list. They'll come to you eventually if you kick butt in all your other places. All right, so Susanne and I could talk about this for hours, but we both have other things and we need to do. She has to go talk to actually a startup practice. We welcome your questions. So it's Madden@theverdengroup.com. Got it right this time. It's chip@pcc.com. Yeah, Verden. It's chip@pcc.com. We welcome your questions. We love to answer these, and if we get enough, we'll fire up another one of these. Glad to do it.
And one other quick thing, Chip, if you're thinking about this and you may be planning it a year from now, 2 years from now, we will be doing this talk again at the AAP. So, American Academy of Pediatrics, NCE 2020. We'll be doing our show again then. So so you'll have an opportunity, obviously, to learn about the 5, really 6, maybe 25 steps that you need to go through to open your practice. But feel free to check us out there.
All right. Well, and thank you, Suzanne. It's always
a pleasure. It's been fun, as always. Great.
Talk to you soon. All righty. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, guys. Bye.